Hi everybody, this is Mr. Pagliuco speaking on behalf of Pagliuco Enterprises International, presenting So You Need to Improve Your Reading. Obviously reading is very difficult. I think it's difficult for most people. It was certainly difficult for me and still is. Sometimes I think for very few people reading comes quite naturally, but for the rest of us what makes us a good reader is our willingness to work at it until we understand. If you're willing to work at reading until you understand it, I would consider yourself a good reader. If you rush through and then don't get it and move on, I wouldn't think so. So with that in mind, I'm here to present some tips and techniques for you to get through some difficult reading, such as text work. Okay, so our my first tip is to choose a ideal location that has no distractions. If you can get to the library, it's good to make it a destination. When you drive all that way, you will focus when you get there, especially in those cubicles. Another one is, a quiet room, of course. Now, this sounds obvious, but you guys don't always follow this advice. You have your iPads in your ears. That music is just iPods, rather. That music is distracting. It's your mind is on your music rather than what you're reading. Another one is phones. Obviously, you're always going to be checking your phones for messages and so forth. The TV has a screen to look at as well as something to listen to. So in all, I think that we need to be wary of these devices and know that if we want to get in some good, high-quality reading, then we better rid ourselves of them. Next, time. The idea is don't rush. Now look, if you're reading the textbook right now and you're not understanding what you're reading, you have to increase your ratio of time to pages. So for me, generally speaking, if I were to read 40 pages of text, I would give myself about 60 minutes. Now I know that because I finally started to understand what I was reading at this ratio. I do believe that some people are at a ratio of 40 to 40, and obviously it depends on the subject and the textbook that you're using. But if you can't be in a rush if you are going to understand what you're reading. Reading is just too hard. Okay, next we're going to be looking at text organization. This is a tip I call pre-reading, and we really only pre-read when we aren't in a rush. If we are in a rush, we tend to skip all the helpful cues that the textbook provides. So if we take a look here, we see that this is a chapter outline in the beginning of a history book textbook chapter, and we see that it's divided into sections. So we're going to be reading about the expansion of Europe, the Spanish in the Americas. They get a whole big section, and then everybody else in the Americas. So that's interesting that everybody else gets the same size section as the Spanish do. Now, if I don't have 60 minutes to get through all of this, and I say I only have 25, I'm going to use this chapter outline and only read this portion because that all has something in common that I can then summarize. If I have a little bit more time, then I'll try to get through here. But if I don't have time to get through both sections, I'm probably not going to continue. I'm going to cut it short, and I'm only going to read this first section. Okay, so then when we get through that initial portion of the text, we can go and take a look at a different part. And you can see at the very beginning, after the initial story, which I would read, it's probably going to be the most interesting part of the chapter because it's told in story form instead of nonfiction. And down here we see key topics. If you wonder what's important to take notes on, pay attention to these key topics. And then anything in the text in the margin is also very helpful to let you know what's important. After you've taken a look at these, and at the very end, there's other techniques too at the variant tips and guides at the very end of the chapter that I wouldn't ignore. This textbook is doing everything it can to help you read. Don't be in such a rush that you just breeze right through it. My guess is that many students don't even read these headlines right here to understand what they're reading about. They go right to the text. Then finally, we get to the text, and we see that we have the headline, so we know where in the chapter we are. We see these little tips for quick review, which is over here in the margin, And then we want to pay attention to the indentation. Whenever we see an indentation, we know we're on to a new topic. This will help you in outlining. You need to determine whether the topic of this paragraph is worth putting in your notes or not. Some will be and some won't be. But whenever there's an indentation, we know that it's introducing a new topic that may be of importance. Okay, moving on to repetition. I'm suggesting that you read your text 3 times. The first time is quick. That might even be 40 pages for me, 40 pages in 40 minutes. It might even be that quick. It would be 1 free period if I were you. Let's see. The second time is thorough. And the second time I'll be taking notes. One good thing about reading it quick initially is that then when we're in class, you're going to know what I'm talking about. If you read it quick initially, immediately after the test, everything that I say in class, you're going to be at least familiar with instead of hearing it for the first time. Second time, you're going through it thorough. This is beyond what I've done in class, beyond your initial reading. You're taking notes here. This is the big time through, the most important time through, and I'm going to say that this, if you've already read it once, I'm going to say 60 minutes. If you haven't read it once, you're looking at probably 80 minutes. It depends on the person. It's no big deal. And then finally, you read it the third time through. This is sort of studying before the test and a review. It depends. If you're studying and reading it, you might be at this for 60 minutes. If you're only reading it and not really studying, maybe a little less. Repetition 3 times plus class, I think you're going to be okay. My guess is if you're having trouble retaining what you're reading, you're not reading it enough times. That's very tedious, and you need to be disciplined to do it this way. Nevertheless, it's effective. Students have told me, I'm like, how do you do so well in this class? And they read it, one student said 4 times. So there you have it. Okay, some techniques. We've already said the pre-reading. Taking a look at the chapter organization. A second one is, once you're done with each of those sections, summarize in your own words what you just read and what they have in common. After you summarize, you can evaluate the support for what you just read and whether you believe it or not. Another thing that you can do is make connections. Make connections to your own life. Make connections to other material from other classes that you're taking. And finally, make connections to the outside world. You can analyze the perspective of the author. Does this guy seem to know what she's talking about? What perspective are they writing from? What is the purpose behind what they're writing? And finally, one thing that a lot of good readers seem to do is they seem to converse. They seem to converse with their reading. John Adams, there's a whole book written about just the words that he wrote in the margins of the books in his library. I think he wrote something like 30,000 words. Now, it's tough sometimes for you to write in your books, of course, because you don't own them, but nevertheless, that shows you the level in which he's interacting with his text. Okay, when you're having trouble, unfortunately, it is whether or not we are doing these things, whether we are in a proper location and dedicating the proper amount of time. If we're still having difficulty, we need to question whether we can handle the amount of pages. Not many, but some people can handle doing this at 6 pages per night. That's perfectly normal, and I think it's very difficult to even do 6. Other people can handle 15. And then some people, they're just, I can't even explain it. They can probably do upwards of 25 or something like that. All right, so if we're having trouble at this level, we may need to do this level. If this level we're doing with ease, maybe we can handle more. Or maybe we need to reschedule our lives to be able to dedicate more time. I think everybody can probably do 15 pages a day. It's just a question of how much time they're willing to dedicate towards it. Okay, thanks a lot. I hope this really helps. Talk soon.